literally.
Hello and welcome to another episode of DAWNCast. I'm Diley.
And I'm Cathy Ngo.
And today we've got Nikki Hind. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly, Nikki.
You've pronounced it incorrectly, but you would not be the only one. It's Hind.
Hind, okay. So thank you. Thanks for correcting that, Nikki. So Nikki Hind is joining us from rural New South Wales in the wonderful town of Albury. So that's in the border of Victoria, the Albury-Wodonga kind of, geography. Now, we've welcomed Nikki because she's got amazing and a unique story to tell, being, I believe, the first blind fashion designer in Australia. Is that right, Nikki?
Apparently so. I keep waiting for someone else to contact me to say, no, I'm legally blind and I've been doing this for years. But no, I created my first collection in 2015 and I started looking for other vision impaired, legally blind fashion designers in Australia and couldn't find them. So I started looking further afield, and there are certainly ones overseas. And I contacted Vision Australia saying, I can't find any. Do you know of any? And they said, no, but there'd have to be some somewhere. And by about 2 years later, Vision Australia wrote an article declaring Nikki Hind Australia's first blind fashion designer. So I figured I probably get to safely call myself Australia's first blind fashion designer.
Wow.
How did you get started in fashion design? Because just from reading your history, you started off in PR and events management, but then you fell into fashion design. So, was it always a long time passion, or did it just happen more recently?
It was when I was a teenager. Fashion design and I have to say, along with choreography, but I certainly didn't pursue that because I can't dance unless I've had half a bottle of champagne. But yeah, they were the happy places I used to go to in my head. So I'd be forever designing things in my head, that nice, happy, relaxing place you escape to. It's always something. And for me, it was fashion design. But I thought that was very, very unpractical. So I pursued more practical things. But I used to sit in front of what was the Golden Gown Awards at the time, the precursor to Australian Fashion Awards and all the, wonderful industry events and awards that are on now. And I'd lie on the floor and sketch fabulous designs that I hope to see on the runway one day. And then, so I really didn't give it another second thought. I would just daydream on occasion. In high school, I would make things for my school social and sticky tape them together and staple them together because I didn't even have a sewing machine. But when I became legally blind in my early to mid 30s, followed by kind of a series of traumatic events, I guess, I found myself with my world just turned upside down. I was a legally blind single mum of these two beautiful little boys. I was financially ruined. I was struggling with the effects of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And so it was from that place. I thought, well, I'm going to give, I guess,
fashion.
Intuitively, I thought I'm going to follow an aspiration. I want to get out from under this horrible, heavy stress. I did not want to be an unconfident, unjoyous, stressed mum. No way did I want to raise those little boys like that. So it was a dream I reached for, I guess, to try and help lift me back up again.
Is it all right? Do you mind sharing what happened? How did you become legally blind?
Yeah, not at all. And it's I think it's a very unusual story. I'm not sure because I had a stroke. I have a really rare blood clotting disorder. My hematologist was so excited when it was diagnosed. I think she wrote a paper on it because it's really, really rare, called ineffective tissue plasminogen activator. And being a Doctor Who fan from way back, sounds like something from Doctor Who. So unbeknownst to me, I'd actually been having mini strokes for years, and
Right.
I lost 3 pregnancies as well. So the stroke happened when I was pregnant with my now first son, but I don't remember the time it exactly happened because I was always legally blind in one eye anyway. And it was a high risk pregnancy, and there are all sorts of funny symptoms going on anyway. So bizarrely enough, I don't know exactly when it happened, but it's a brain injury in essence. It wiped out 50% of my field of vision in both eyes. So now I can see out of half of one eye.
Right. When you talk about legally blind, what can you see and what can't you see? Can you give a short kind of explanation so people can imagine what that would be like?
Yeah, what does it mean by illegal? Sorry,
Illegally
sorry.
blind.
I mean legally blind.
Give my real name on here. I'm in big trouble. No, no, legally blind. All above board.
Not legally blonde.
Exactly, legally blind. Yes, by far the majority of people, and I feel uncomfortable being described as Australia's first blind fashion designer, but that's the way that I guess people in the vision impairment area speak. You're either blind or you're not. I always call myself legally blind because I can see, but by far the majority of people with vision impairment, blind people, have some level of vision. It's actually relatively rare to be completely blind. So for me, I can see out of the inside half of my right eye, and that bit left is nearly 20/20 vision, which is pretty good. But of course, it's got nothing to balance with. So I don't know if yourselves or your listeners, viewers, remember that part in Wayne's World where he's looking at her and saying, camera 1, camera 2. You know, when you do that and things shift a little bit,
Yeah.
you know, I don't see anything where it is. It's either off of, I never know. Where is it? It's a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. So for starters, I don't see things quite where they are. I don't have depth perception, or I can't get a hold of speed and distance because you need 2 eyes to line up for that. I don't have peripheral vision, obviously, and it's really, really hard for me. I actually have good detail vision, but it's so hard to keep a hold of it. So I can still read the phone book, if there's any such thing anymore. I can still read very small print, and I can see tiny detail, but it escapes in a fraction of a second. So I'm forever refocusing, which is physically
Draining.
Exhausting. Yeah.
So how then do you design? Because you've shown that it is possible. So how do you design?
Well, I guess because I've been asked so many times on this journey, you know, what things are more difficult being a fashion designer, a blind fashion designer, legally blind fashion designer. And the further I go along this journey, I feel like the things that are hard are not the things at all to do with my vision. The things that are hard, the hardest thing is finding a good manufacturing chain, good ethical manufacturing chain. But I don't know. I can see detail. I love the feel of fabrics to touch, but obviously then I love the feel of fabrics on your body when you're wearing them. So I love the feel of fabrics. I love the fit of things, how they fit. And I love beautiful detail. So all those things are a bonus to me. I guess I'm very, I'm slow. I'm slow at everything I do now. And that can be anxiety provoking. And certainly in the beginning, it was really anxiety provoking. You've got to learn to live within your visual means. And a lot of that was slowing life down. But there were nice benefits to that. And I became a mum at the same time. So I had this beautiful little baby to to take care of and nurture anyway.
Yeah, you talked about how when at the time when you went legally blind, you also gave birth to your son. So that then took precedent in terms of your focus, your attention, rather than what actually happened to you. Can you share a bit more around that, how you coped mentally with that whole event around your life?
Yeah, and again, it's another thing that people say, wow, that must have been really difficult, becoming a mum at the same time. And I guess for me, it's always been, I think, thank goodness, because the legal blindness came into my life at exactly the same time um, as motherhood, this beautiful little baby. And it just, the legal blindness just kind of had to take a back seat. Obviously, there were things that were more difficult, but I guess, you know, motherhood, especially with a brand new baby, is all about, you know, communicating and bonding and nurturing and
your first one and was your first one as well? First time motherhood, was that for you?
It was first time motherhood, and I've got I guess what was difficult about that was the blood clotting disorder almost killed. His name is Darcy. Almost killed Darcy as well. I was taken to hospital because I'd already lost had three miscarriages at I think about 16 weeks each of them, because the blood clotting disorder I have that they finally found, you just can't carry a baby to full term. You can't dissolve your body's blood clots, and you have blood clots happening all the time, and particularly in pregnancy. So you're essentially giving the baby a heart attack. You're blocking off the blood supply, so you cannot carry them full term without medication. But they didn't know what I had. I didn't know what it was. So yeah, again at about 15, 16 weeks, you know, after the safety 12 weeks mark, I was taken to hospital because I was bleeding, and there was a Sunday, and the doctor told me, "I'm so sorry, you've lost this baby, but there's no anaesthetist here. We can't do a D&C. You'll have to come back tomorrow. You know, go home and please come back in tomorrow." And I went home and took lots of Nurofen, too many Nurofen, because I was really upset and in lots of pain. But Nurofen is aspirin based. So yes, don't try this at home, kids. But yeah, I think I went in the next day, and they did the, you know, initial physical and said there's a heartbeat there. And Darcy was there, so he's my little miracle baby. And my doctor put me on Klaxane, a blood thinner, without knowing what was actually wrong. And they didn't find out what was wrong until, after my second baby was born, so probably 3 years later. But yeah, he's my little miracle man. He nearly died as well.
Wow. I'm just trying to process all of
that information.
Yeah, it's just obviously been a lot of trauma, and I can see why you started Blind Group, because you almost needed that escape as a coping mechanism. Is that right? Or?
Well, yes, and yeah, it was, there was unfortunately a background of some abuse in my childhood and later in life. Like many women, I had been sexually abused as a child, and I raped as a young adult. Sadly, this is terribly common. So yeah, it was, and then my marriage falling apart was hideously traumatic. It was awful. It did not go well at all. It didn't go well at all. My ex-husband fled with the children, and we had to have them returned by the police, and all sorts of just awful things that escalated over years. So by the time I found myself alone, and we were certainly left with no money. Just all those layers of, I don't know, just left me feeling quite crushed, and I didn't have great family networks to rely on. So again, like many people, it doesn't happen like it does in the movies, and for everyone, there are a lot of people that don't always have those networks in place to rely on. So it was all those things, and it was absolutely a determined desire to. There was not a chance I was going to remain crushed. No way. These two beautiful little boys are only tiny, and so it was that reaching for the things. I guess it's that approach motivation rather than avoidance motivation. With trauma, that avoidance motivation is very, very strong. And so I guess instinctively I reached for a dream, an aspiration, something that was strong enough to kind of negate that avoidance motivation. And this is what Blind Grit is based around, that idea of aspiration, validation, and motivation, and the incredible power of that combination to, to connect with people's potential. Blind Grit, of course, is it's made of and around people who live with disability, and I include surviving trauma, and it's an invisible disability. Well, it's invisible, and it's invisible until you see the negative consequences of it, which are often things like, homelessness, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, intergenerational unemployment, all sorts of awful negative things that we see. But there are just such incredible potential in surviving trauma and living with disability, that being out of your comfort zone and what that can breed in you. So that's what I feel very passionately about. So that when I realised, when I started to look at what being a fashion designer, what success would look like for me, I didn't want to just bring more clothes into the world. That's a lovely creative thing. I love doing that. But I just wanted to use that platform of fashion and creativity, I guess, to communicate the incredible value of people who live with disability and survive trauma.
Nikki, that was an amazingly powerful conversation you just gave us. As I listen to you, I'm thinking, how did you get yourself through that traumatic period in your life? Because there are people who've had, as you've said, suffered sexual abuse and other trauma, but they become a victim. They can't seem to recover from that. You've got such a positive outlook in life, and you've got so much energy.
Your aura is so beautiful.
Yeah. So how did you get to that place?
Yeah, because you said that you didn't have any family. Like, what support?
No networks.
Yeah, what support?
What did you do?
Yeah.
I know, so many questions.
But we're like, wow.
What did you do? Well, and I mean, it wasn't, what is it? I don't know. I have to say, I'm an optimist. I'm a huge optimist. And I also, and I'm quite, this is going to sound a bit melodramatic or...
No, nothing's melodramatic here.
I'm driven by love. And I know in these days and times that sounds a bit like a soap opera rather than something real and genuine and useful. But it's real and it's genuine and it's useful. Being driven by love. I was driven initially by the love of my children I wanted to give them the absolute best of me. And I think I'm funny. I think I'm hilarious. And I think I'm creative. And I think I can be light and fun. I think I'm fairly smart. I think I'm open-minded, like all these good things. Like, why wouldn't you want to be up there? And when you talk about people who don't quite make it when they survive trauma, there are so many reasons, and I guess that's part of my drive with Blind Grit, because there is no way that's going to get less. We're not going to get less people surviving trauma, and we're probably not going to get less people living with disability. And I don't see either of those things necessarily as a negative. I think just some incredible things are born out of that, and to have I want society to see it more. I want society to value it more in a real tangible way, because it can be a huge value add to society. It doesn't have to be, people don't have to fall along the way. It can breed such beautiful humanity, a real connection to what's important. It's like a lovely big disruption. I'm a massive fan of disruption. We're just at the tail end of one here in Australia, coronavirus. Aside from all the awful, awful deaths and illness, I was very excited about the possibilities that coronavirus might bring up. I'm a big fan of disruption, but disruption is scary because you're out of your comfort zone and it's expensive, but when it's forced upon you, and it's forced upon you when you live with disability, it's forced upon you when you survive a trauma, and there are such good things. People who live with disability, people who survive trauma, I think can be naturally very inclusive thinkers, natural innovators, naturally creative, all these wonderful qualities that we really admire and aspire to. And it would be so great if we just, we're able to recognise and release that potential, rather than being, we're often quite blind, particularly to trauma. It's rather invisible. And unfortunately with disability, I think there's still quite a large focus on entry-level positions, more so than still a bit of that, disability, the dis of the ability, the lack of the ability, rather than what have this group of people possibly, what may they have that we don't. They live outside their comfort zone 24/7, and everyone knows you cannot grow without being outside your comfort zone. You can't grow muscle, you can't grow cardio fitness, you can't grow emotionally, you can't grow mentally. You must push outside your comfort zone, and it can be really difficult. And both those groups of people, trauma survivors and people who live with disability, are experts at it.
Do you, in terms of, do you revisit those traumatic moments, not to beat yourself up, but do you reflect back on those moments and you have found the strength to grow from that? Like, are there lessons for what are some of the lessons, I suppose, for you from those?
And sorry, I didn't really answer that question, did I? I went off on a tangent on, which I do.
No, you forgot what the question was.
I have spent so much of my life seeing psychologists. It's not that I don't think there's any. I don't have any magic thing I do or that I am. yes, I wanted to be the best I could be. And I'm an optimist, and I'm literally driven by love, which makes me sound really, it's kind of, I can see myself in this camera. I feel a bit funny looking at myself and saying that. So there was this, always this drive. It was just horrible, and I've been on Valium for weeks at a time, just so as I can cope with being a mum. And for, in that time that Blind Grit was born, I just felt like I was pretending, because, and children, I think I did. I think I was much more able to see it for what it was and face it and think, no, that wasn't okay, when I had children. Because so many abusers will, especially when you're young, you just think, oh, maybe that's just what happens. Maybe maybe I'm a attention seeker. Maybe I don't know. And when I had my own children, it was so, I kind of knew in a way, but it was, no, my gosh, that's not what adults do to children. It's not what adults do to other adults. It's not okay. So I guess that made me more capable of, I guess, putting the responsibility and the blame, if you're going to call it blame, where it bloody belonged. Because you tend not to, and any other person out there who's, suffered abuse, you do, especially as a child, you do tend to keep it special for yourself. Because, so that really helped being a mum. But I just tried really hard. Have a sense of humour, never take yourself too seriously. But good grief, my children have seen me cry on the floor, and then I think, oh my God, what kind of mum does that? And I think, well, a real mum, they will know if ever they have to cry on the floor. That's actually what capable humans do sometimes. It doesn't mean I'm incapable because I'm crying on the floor.
We are humans.
I've cried on the floor in front of my children a few times. So it's there's no, I don't know that there's any magic bullet, but there was definitely a reaching for an aspiration. I know I'm strong, but I think many people who survive trauma know that. So I just know I am, but it was hard, and I'm on antidepressants as we speak. I've been on them for years. So a whole myriad of things, finding other places to get validation from, other than the ones that you were craving it from and it didn't come from, and I just used to feel, and I can still fall into it now sometimes. I would feel like I was just living on the verge of crisis, like walking a tightrope, just in fear of falling into the abyss. It's dark and it's scary, but was it the Tempest? I'll go all Shakespearean on you.
Please,
when
take us there. Take us there.
In the Tempest, there's that line of, how did you survive? How did you survive? They asked the man, and he says, because my daughter was in the same boat. My children were in the same boat. There was not a chance. I was not going to, not only. And what's the point of just surviving if you can kick ass?
So the difference was you.
Just have to throw that in, because that's our slogan.
Yeah.
Oh,
the difference.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I guess it was.
Yeah.
I guess
The
it
difference.
was.
I mean,
that's a beautiful slogan.
Yeah.
There's tremendous power in sharing your story today, and even though we've never met before, I feel everything that you've just mentioned, which is really powerful. And I know sharing your story has probably not been easy. And what's your advice to other people who want to share their story, and perhaps they've experienced a lot of trauma in their life, but may not feel ready or empowered yet because, I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability in what you've shared with us. So what would be your advice to our listeners?
Yeah, and that vulnerability is it's a whole topic in itself, isn't it? Because it's so important, and I think we should value it in leaders. I guess I would like to see surviving trauma as something you put on your resume. So I know that's not a useful tip for right now, but that's what Blind Grit's about. You know, it's awful that it's so isolating and still so seemingly shameful, because I've never ever worked so hard and been so unbelievably strong as I was in those couple of years when I was pretty much completely isolated. I had no money, no job. To the outside world, I looked like an absolute loser doing nothing. And I have never worked so hard. And people who experience trauma will know that feeling. Yeah, unbelievable strength and work in that period. So don't underestimate that. Never feel alone. Although that's, I know, a ridiculous thing to say, you do feel so alone. Don't underestimate that strength. Know what you've got there. Know what you've got there. Value it. And if you've got someone you can trust, come from that place of love. And pain comes from love. You don't get pain without love.
Do you think it's about owning your story as well? Do you think Blind Grit is about that as well?
Well, and I think part of what I do with Blind Grit, which I've just done a little bit for myself today by telling something publicly about myself that I haven't before, putting some of my story out there and owning it myself today. That power in owning your story, exactly, and owning your story and telling it from a safe, strength-based place. But I guess I don't want to. I'm mindful of not just saying, go tell the world, because it might not. You've got to be safe too. Don't it sound even more ridiculous? It'll be okay. It'll be okay. And if you're in a time of isolation, and maybe just reach out to. I reached out to Vision Australia, and you don't have to tell everything straight away. Just have at least some little safety things. And if you have to be at home licking your wounds, I think that's okay. Society tells you it's not okay to be so isolated and alone, and it certainly feels awful. But I presume it's part of the healing and the getting there as well. Own your story. It's probably an awesome one. But yeah, it's okay. And if you need to nurture yourself there, that's okay too.
Nikki, I also think what you've also done, which is extremely powerful, is you've helped normalize the conversations around trauma. Yeah. And I know that still today, it's shameful to share. And if I was to say from the perspective of a culturally diverse person, growing up, you never share, your dirty, or as they would say, dirty laundry or anything like that, because it's like it makes you look weak. But in actual fact, it makes you look stronger because it's what you've had to overcome. You're a survivor. Yep. And the more people share stories like this, the more it empowers other people to share the same as well. Because I think each one of us suffers from trauma some way or another. Like, it could be something small, but in that moment, it was traumatic. Could have been as a child or a abusive relationship, whatever it is. And, I just want to congratulate you for being so, You know,
vulnerable
showing the
with us.
vulnerable. That's right, because I just feel like I was almost crying before actually, but I was like,
no,
hold back those tears.
Same here.
Because once it comes out,
That's right. Let's go on special for you guys. You cry, I'll cry.
I don't have any tissues here, and my makeup will run, and I'm way too vain.
Yeah.
But yeah, look. Before we kind of wrap up the conversation, tell us. I know we touch upon blind grit. I know that you're the first, blind, legally blind fashion designer. But what does blind grit do? What is it that you're offering to people, and what do you want people to know about blind grit?
Yep. Well, blind grit appears to be the only in the world, I have to say, that I keep researching intermittently. I still can't find another like it. Fashion label that is built entirely of and around people who live with disability and survive trauma. So all the fabulous, aspirational, fun, creative, glamorous jobs that sit behind the development of a fashion label. So the modelling, photography, obviously the design itself, graphic design, social media. There is so makeup and hair, all that stuff. Anything that we can bring in-house will be done by people who live with disability or survive trauma. There seems to be plenty of fashion labels who use, vulnerable people who survive trauma, to make the garments and empower them that way so as they can earn an income and be independent, which is fabulous. But yeah, I can't find any other fashion label that is built entirely of and around people who live with disability and survive trauma. And I have to say, I won an ING Dream Starter scholarship for the business model of Blind Grit a few years ago. Blind Grit is inspirational athleisure wear created by those who conquer challenges for those who are ready for one. So athleisure wear, for those of you who don't know, but I think most people do by now, it's fabulous looking fitness gear. The joke about athleisure wear is it's fitness gear you don't intend to break a sweat in.
That's me.
Yeah. But you can break a sweat in our gear as well. It's very good. But so the idea is when you slip into our gear, you get to borrow that awesome challenge conquering energy to push out of your own comfort zone and put down that third Mars bar and go for a jog. And yeah.
Wonderful. So it's a fitness fitness gear wear.
It's fitness. It's good looking fitness gear. It's designer fitness gear.
You don't have to be an eastern suburbs mum to wear it.
No.
It's for everybody.
It's for everybody. Yeah. So it's designer.
Beautiful.
It's designer fitness gear. So the idea is tapping into that that challenge conquering energy, that being outside your comfort zone. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. We're very honoured, I have to say, and I'm sure Cathy would agree with me.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favourite interviews.
We're very, very privileged. Yeah, it's been so raw, vulnerable, honest, and filled with love as well. And I hope that our audience, listeners, those who watch this, would feel the same. And thank you so much for reaching out and for being part of DAWNCast. And
we wish you every success with Blind Grit, and please keep us up to date as well.
Absolutely.
We'll be following your social media.
We'll be following you.
Yeah.
And we'll be sharing this, and I have no doubt that we'll continue this conversation, Nikki. I don't think this is the first. It won't be the last.
Excellent. I know we are. Yes, I know we share a lot of
absolutely
similar values, a lot of similar passions. Yes,
absolutely. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us here on DAWNCast, everybody. I'm Di Lee, and if you have stories that you would like us to broadcast, you want us to talk about and share with us, please make sure you click on the bell button on the link below here and subscribe to us, and or email us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Cathy Ngo. See you guys later.
Bye.
Thank you.